Hello everybody. So today I wanted to address some questions that I heard in the Australian Cricket Supporters Group that Glenn Maxwell should be dumped from the Australian 2020 side in time for the World Cup that's coming at the end of the year in, I think it's September, October, well, in the next month. So the first thing we've got to consider, Glenn Maxwell, he is a little bit older. I think he's 33. Might be 35, I'm not quite sure of his age there, I'd have to look it up, but he's up there around the sort of age where some players start to wane a little bit with their quality and they start to retire and that sort of thing. Now, his average and strike rate in 2020 internationals is one of the best in the world. So I think his average is like 33 and strike rate 160. So there are a handful of players that are above him in terms of overall performance. Virat Kohli, probably the number one of all time, is above him. That's probably about it. You got Virat Kohli, Glenn Maxwell, number two. So that all-time record, Glenn Maxwell probably number two. Now there's a couple of other Australians that have similar sorts of records. David Warner is another one, Aaron Finch is another one. They're really kind of the three best T20 cricketers, for Australia at least, of all time. Now they are behind Virat Kohli, that's true. But these three, yes, they're all in their 30s, but they are certainly the three best, at least in terms of potential, in Australia's team. And I know, look, we've got Tim David that we're playing at the moment. He is born in Singapore, but he's apparently eligible to play for Australia and Singapore. That's nice for him. I would have thought he'd have to play for Singapore, but I suppose Singapore aren't exactly a test team, and he plays domestic cricket for Australia, so he gets to play for two countries. Lucky him. And look, I don't know how good Tim David's going to be long term. He does have a bit of potential. He did really well for Singapore against a lot of weaker nations, a lot of, non-test nations. I don't know if he'll be really any good in the World Cup sort of level. He doesn't have that experience at that level. I think it'd be a big risk to play him. I'm not saying that we shouldn't give him a try, but I think it'd be a massive risk. I think he probably should be in the squad, but probably not be playing, as a guaranteed in every 11. But Glenn Maxwell should. And I'm going to say Glenn Maxwell also, and look, sometimes his bowling's a load of rubbish, but sometimes he can bowl really tidily and he can even take wickets. Now there's certain conditions, all that sort of thing. He's a spin bowler. You don't want him bowling every match, but he's a good support for that. And look, I'm not saying that he should make the team as a bowler. He's nowhere near good enough for that. But he can sort of play as that fifth bowling option or the sixth. And perhaps the safest option is to combine him with another player who also bowls a bit, perhaps a Cameron Green or a Mitchell Marsh, and they can each share the 4 overs, 2 overs each, and with one of them bowling well, they get the full 4. And that's his sort of role. And he's also a very good fielder, very good catcher, good at saving runs. So his actual statistics as far as the runs he scores at the strike rate and the wickets he takes is not the extent of his impact to the side. So he actually also has that little X factor on top of that. Now, if he was out of form, and I've seen some statistics thrown around and they've said, oh look, this was a run of bad form in ODIs and T20s, and they've cherry picked. They've got 6 matches and 2 of them he actually got really good scores, but they got 4 low scores out of 6. Well, he's clearly out of form. Of course, it's almost like we've got amnesia about how T20 cricket works, even how ODI cricket works. If you get a good ball, you can get out cheaply. It's a bit different to Test cricket. Yes, Test cricket that can happen as well, but there's a lot more consistency in Test cricket. You don't sort of have low, massive score like you do in T20 cricket, where you can have 0, 0, 0, 0, 150. That's the sort of thing that can happen And I mean, probably not 150, but you know, big scores. And yeah, you don't need to get a big score every single match. Was there a match where he cost the side the match? I don't think there was. You know, so I know we do like to, and quite reasonably, we punish players who are on the fringes and do something wrong on purpose, on accident, that costs us the match. And I think that's fair enough. And I think when you are a fringe player, you sort of know, oh look, you're barely in the side, you do something that little bit wrong that costs you the match, you might not have meant to do it, and we're going to dump you. And I think that's what we should be doing, particularly if they're a hunch player. And we've been having a few hunch players in Test cricket of late, but hopefully we've got over doing that. But certainly Glenn Maxwell is not a hunch player, not now. He's a consistent player who's, yes, probably towards the end of his career, and this might well be his last T20 World Cup. Might be. Might have one more in him after this. I don't know his schedule. He's talking about going into Test cricket again, trying to get some skills going, get some experience and break into the Test team again. So I don't know if he'll succeed with that, but I think he's pretty close to making the Test team. And this is the thing, so if you were looking at Australia's best players, you're going to have, well, batting wise, you're going to have David Warner number 1, you're probably going to have Glenn Maxwell number 2, and then Aaron Finch number 3. And then after that, I don't know, there's probably a few gaps, a few people that probably aren't completely pulling their weight. And look, Cameron Green did well in the last couple of matches, good on him. I still don't put him in that top 3 at the moment. And Steve Smith, yeah, he's quite consistent, he's got a good average, not such a good strike rate. I don't put him in that top 3 either, not in T20s. And look, I think Steve Smith in T20s for Australia is a fringe player. And that might come as a bit of a surprise when you consider how good he is in Tests. I don't consider Steve Smith to be easily the best player, or I think he's in the team, but he's fairly marginally in the team. If you had a choice of dropping a Steve Smith out of form or a Glenn Maxwell out of form from the T20 game, who are you going to drop? Steve Smith. Now, Steve Smith's not out of form, so he's fine, he's in there. But you're not putting Glenn Maxwell behind him. And I mean, I'd put Aaron Finch probably behind Glenn Maxwell as our third player. But we're not dropping our third best player. We shouldn't be. We've made him captain, rightly or wrongly. I think Aaron Finch is a good captain. And, you know, he's makes some mistakes sometimes, but he's got a lot of experience. He's generally pretty good. Leading Australia for a long time. I'd love to see Aaron Finch lead the team for the T20 World Cup. And realistically, who is going to replace Glenn Maxwell? Do you put Tim David in there? Now, Tim David doesn't bowl. His average is not, well, sorry. His average is actually better, but that's playing for Singapore. His domestic average is nowhere near as good. His strike rate nowhere near as good. And he doesn't even play first class cricket. He's a short format specialist. He's played for Singapore. He's from Singapore, but he's playing in Australia domestically and somehow managed to earn an Australian cap. And I mean, I don't know the eligibility requirements for how someone born in Singapore who played for Singapore gets to change to play for Australia without really living here that much, but we've got him. Good on us. I'd put Tim David in the squad. Would I put him in the first 11? I don't know. I might be happy giving Tim David a shot, at least for the first game, see how he goes. Do I replace probably our second best batsman and maybe our best overall player, that being Glenn Maxwell, with Tim David? I think you'd be crazy. If you're going to drop someone to put Tim David in, you're going to drop a fringe player. You might say, oh, okay, who's a fringe player? Well, Steve Smith and Cameron Green. They're fringe players. In the 2020 squad they are. They're just barely there at the moment. And they've been doing all right, but I would feel a lot more comfortable dropping one of them than dropping Glenn Maxwell. Because even though Glenn Maxwell's got a few low scores, sure, he has that potential to just absolutely take the game away from anyone. And you know, it just seems crazy to think that against two of the best sides in the world in New Zealand and India, it's got a few low scores, and so some people are talking about dropping. This is stupid. This is cherry picking of stats, and there's no way I would consider dropping him. And I really do hope the selectors are completely ignoring these people who are calling for him to be dropped. I think that we've got to just completely ignore that. Sort of focus on who are the best players. Yes, go for people who are in form. Yes, go for people who are new and up and coming. But also we need to have a mix of experience and youth. And as we always do, we need to have a mix of different things so that if someone fails, someone else can take up the slack. And in T20 you need to have those impact players. And there's few impact players as big an impact as Glenn Maxwell in the entire world in the 2020 game. And you know, probably Virat Kohli and then Glenn Maxwell number 2. And I think that we've got to really say how absolutely stupid this is to go after that top player when, you know, we're not going after the ones that are a bit below that. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye bye.